For half a century, the Western CEO were intoxicated by a fevered dream of a market so vast it felt like a new frontier for capitalism itself. Then, like a mirage in the East, China appeared. They saw 2 billion people, a billion potential customers who had never owned a car, never tasted a soda, never seen a computer. Imagine for a moment you are the CEO of a major Western corporation in the early 1990s. Perhaps you're at the helm of General Motors, Volkswagen, or General Electric. You sit in your wood-paneled office, staring at sales charts for Europe and North America. What do you see? Flat lines. The markets are saturated. Everyone who needs a car already has one, every house that needs a washing machine is already plumbed in. Competition is a suffocating, zero-sum game. But then, you look east. You look at China, and what you see is breathtaking. A nation of 2 billion people, stirring after decades of isolation and poverty. You see a land where almost no one owns a car, where a modern refrigerator is a luxury, and where the potential is so immense it defies logic. You grab a paper and start sketching numbers. If you could sell a toothbrush to just 10% of that population, you'd be wealthier than your wildest imagination. If you sold cars to just 1%, you would go down in history as the greatest CEO to ever live. To the West, China looked like the greatest gold rush in the history of capitalism. It made the California gold rush of 1849 look like a village lottery. So, the ships crossed the Pacific. The private jets descended on Beijing. Lawyers churned out contracts by the thousands. Entire factories in Detroit and Wolfsburg were dismantled, crated up, and shipped halfway across the world to Shanghai and Shenzhen. The West truly believed they were entering a new era of global prosperity. They believed they were going to get fabulously rich. And they believed that, through the sheer power of trade, they could make China more like the West. They were wrong. They were wrong about almost everything. You see, they weren't walking into a gold mine. They were walking into a classroom, a gargantuan academy of industrial knowledge. And here is the sting, in that classroom, the Western giants weren't the teachers. They were the textbooks. They were the living curriculum, destined to be studied, absorbed, and eventually replaced. What those CEOs failed to grasp, what they fundamentally misunderstood, was that the Chinese government had a very specific plan from the outset. They didn't just want your cars on their roads or your iPhones in their pockets. They wanted something far more valuable. They wanted to know exactly how to build them. They had no intention of remaining a permanent customer, dependent on foreign tech. They wanted to become the competitor, the rival who would one day eclipse the master. To achieve this, they needed the blueprints, the source code, and the industrial DNA that the West had spent billions to develop over a century. Normally, you don't just hand over your crown jewels. Coca-Cola doesn't share its recipe. Apple doesn't hand out the iOS source code. These secrets are guarded more fiercely than the gold in Fort Knox. But China had a lever, a piece of bait that was impossible to resist. They held the keys to the world's largest market, and Beijing knew exactly how hungry the West was. They didn't just open the gates, they built a toll booth. And that toll was the joint venture requirement. It was a brilliant, legal trap. To sell in China, you had to manufacture in China. To manufacture in China, you had to share your throne with a state-owned enterprise. It is the story of how the West sold its own future for a few quarters of impressive profit. And it all began with a humble motor car. To understand how this system worked, we must go back to the late 1970s. China was emerging from the chaos of the Cultural Revolution. The country was exhausted, its economy shattered. The streets of Beijing weren't filled with cars, they were a sea of bicycles, millions of Phoenix bikes flowing like a giant, metallic river. The Chinese leadership knew they had to modernize, and they had to do it fast. They needed trucks, buses, and cars for the new elite. But there was a problem, they had no idea how to build a modern vehicle. Their factories were stuck in the 1950s, literally hammering metal sheets by hand. Their engines were unreliable, and their brakes were a gamble. They were 50 years behind the West. They could have tried to catch up on their own, but that would take decades. They didn't have decades. So, they took a shortcut. They invited the giants of Detroit and Germany to build factories in China, but with a catch. Under the foreign-invested joint venture law, you couldn't just build your own factory. Volkswagen couldn't just be Volkswagen China. You were forced to partner with a Chinese state-owned enterprise. The deal was simple: the foreign company provided the technology and the know-how, while the Chinese partner provided the land and labor. But the crucial part was the ownership. The foreign firm could not own more than 50%. It was a forced marriage of equals. When this deal was presented, Western CEOs simply shrugged. They were arrogant. They looked at China's primitive workshops and thought, they'll never catch up. By the time they learn how to build a 1980s Santana, we'll be building flying cars. That arrogance was their undoing. Take Volkswagen as the prime example. In 1984, they signed a massive deal with SAIC, Shanghai Automotive Industry Corporation. At the time, SAIC was barely making tractors. Volkswagen brought German engineering to Shanghai, installing massive presses, robotic welders, and veteran engineers. They started producing the Volkswagen Santana. To a German driver, it was a boring, boxy sedan. But to a Chinese driver in 1985, it was a spaceship. It had air conditioning that actually worked. It had a radio. And most importantly, every time you turned the key, it started. Volkswagen made billions. They became the absolute leaders of the Chinese market. For years, if you saw a car in Shanghai, it was almost certainly a Volkswagen. But while the German executives were toasting their quarterly dividends in luxury hotels, their partners at SAIC, Shanghai Automotive, were performing a silent autopsy on every vehicle. Chinese engineers didn't just learn how to assemble a car, they learned the physics of the suspension, the chemistry of the paint, and the dark magic of the supply chain. At night, they studied the blueprints they were legally entitled to access as 50% owners. For 20 years, the arrangement seemed perfect. Volkswagen got the cash, SAIC got the knowledge. But then, the students graduated. By the early 2010s, the atmosphere changed. The Chinese government realized they didn't need to beat the Germans at the petrol engine game, a game the Germans had been playing for a century. Instead, they decided to change the rules of the game entirely. They pivoted to electric vehicles. They used the capital and expertise gained from the joint ventures to fund their own domestic champions like BYD and Geely. Suddenly, Western executives noticed something strange. Their partners were launching their own brands. And when Western engineers looked under the hood of these new Chinese cars, they saw something hauntingly familiar. The suspension mounts were identical. The chassis points were the same. The engineering choices were carbon copies. But these Chinese cars had an edge: they were significantly cheaper, and they were electric. The Western giants began to complain about unfair competition and IP theft, but it was too late. The contracts had been signed decades ago. The trap had sprung. By 2025, the dominance of foreign car brands in China didn't just slip, it went into a free fall. Today, Volkswagen is struggling to survive in the very market it helped build. They taught China how to build cars, and now China is building them better, faster, and cheaper than the Germans ever could. And it doesn't stop at the Chinese border. Massive roll-on, roll-off ships are now carrying thousands of Chinese electric vehicles to Europe, to Mexico, to South America. In Wolfsburg, Germany, the heart of the Volkswagen empire, executives can look out of their windows and see BYDs driving on the Autobahn. It is a bitter irony: the technology transferred in the 80s and 90s has evolved, mutated, and returned to haunt its creators. But the car industry was just the beginning. If a car is a complex consumer product, what happens when you apply this copy machine strategy to the very backbone of a modern nation? What happens when you apply it to the rails? That brings us to the most ruthless example of all, high-speed rail. By the early 2010s, China faced a monumental problem. They possessed one of the largest territories on Earth, but their railway system was a relic, slow, crumbling, and utterly incapable of supporting a modern superpower. They looked at the world with envy. They saw the Shinkansen in Japan, the TGV in France, and the ICE in Germany. They wanted that speed. They wanted a network of 12,000 kilometers of high-speed tracks stretching to every corner of the nation. Once again, they didn't know how to build it from scratch. So they announced an international tender. It was the contract of the century. Tens of billions of pounds were on the table. Predictably, the world's rail giants lined up. Siemens from Germany, Alstom from France, Kawasaki from Japan, and Bombardier from Canada. This wasn't just a deal. For many of these firms, it was a lifeline during a global downturn. But the Chinese Ministry of Railways set the same trap they had perfected in the car industry. The message was clear: if you want to build our rails, you must partner with a state-owned enterprise, either CSR or CNR. And you must hand over the keys. They didn't just want the trains. They demanded the blueprints for the engines, the designs for the braking systems, and the crown jewels, the source code for the signaling systems that prevent high-speed collisions. Inside the boardrooms of Kawasaki in Japan, there was panic. Senior engineers warned that China would simply copy the technology and become a global rival. But the executives at Siemens and Alstom were hungry for revenue. They believed they could manage the risk. They thought they could hold back just enough of their secrets to stay ahead. They were wrong. Kawasaki transferred the tech for the Shinkansen E2. Siemens handed over the Velaro platform. For a few years, it was a golden era of profit. Western firms made a killing selling components and high-priced consultancy. But behind the scenes, Chinese engineers were working around the clock. They launched a program with a name that should have chilled the hearts of every Western CEO. They called it Digestion and Reinnovation. Digestion. It's a biological term. You consume something, you grind it down, you extract the nutrients, and you use them to make your own body stronger. They took the Japanese trains and the German carriages and stripped them down to the last bolt. They analyzed the alloys of the wheels with spectrometers. They tested the aerodynamics in massive wind tunnels. Then, they began to Frankenstein the parts together. They took a Japanese nose, a German body, and rewrote the software to make it faster. In 2010, just years after the first contracts were signed, China unveiled the CRH380A. They called it an indigenous innovation. When Kawasaki's engineers saw it, they were horrified. It was their child, but wearing a different coat. They saw design choices that were identical to their own, even down to the mistakes they had fixed years prior. Then came the final blow. The Chinese government stopped buying foreign trains. Why pay a premium for a Siemens train when you can buy a Chinese version that is 90% identical for 30% less? The Western giants were squeezed like a lemon. Every drop of value was extracted, and once the rind was dry, they were tossed aside. Today, those two Chinese partners have merged to form CRRC, the largest rolling stock manufacturer in the world. They don't just dominate China, they are outbidding Siemens and Alstom in Boston, Chicago, Europe, and Africa. They are using the very technology they were taught to dismantle the companies that taught them. But what happens when the student decides that even a legal joint venture is too slow? What happens when they decide to simply take what they want from the shadows? This is the story of American Superconductor, or AMSC. It sounds like a spy thriller, and in many ways, it was. AMSC was a high-tech firm based in Massachusetts. They didn't build wind turbines, they built the brain of the turbine. This was highly sophisticated software and electronic systems that told the massive blades how to pitch and yaw to catch the wind perfectly. Without this code, a turbine is just an expensive piece of lawn furniture. Their biggest customer was a Chinese giant called Sinovel. The relationship made AMSC a darling of Wall Street. Their stock was soaring. But Sinovel had a secret plan. They wanted the source code, but they didn't want to pay for it. When AMSC refused to sell their crown jewels, Sinovel went hunting for a weak link. They found it in a disgruntled employee named Dejan Karabasevich, a Serbian engineer working for AMSC in Austria. He felt undervalued and underpaid. Sinovel's operatives approached him in quiet cafes. They offered him money, lots of it. They offered him a new life. In 2011, Karabasevich bypassed the encryption, copied the source code onto a thumb drive, and handed it over. Almost overnight, Sinovel stopped all orders from AMSC. Executives in Massachusetts were baffled. They called Beijing, but the phones went dead. Emails were ignored. Then AMSC investigators climbed a turbine in China and looked at the diagnostic screens. They saw their own software running on Sinovel's machines. The copyright notices had been deleted, but the digital fingerprints were unmistakable. By the time they proved it, AMSC was in ruins. Its stock price plummeted 70% in days. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Sinovel, meanwhile, used that stolen brain to become a global titan in wind energy. All that we've seen so far, cars, railways, or wind power, may have helped China dominate the land, but Beijing's ambitions don't stop there. They want to dominate the aerospace industry. For half a century, the sky was a closed shop. A high-altitude duopoly shared between Seattle and Toulouse. Boeing and Airbus didn't just build planes, they owned the very concept of global travel. They believed the barriers to entry, the millions of components, the obsessive safety standards, the sheer engineering wizardry, were a mountain no outsider could ever climb. To the giants of the West, the aerospace industry felt untouchable. You don't just copy the jet engine, you master decades of metallurgy and thermodynamics. But Beijing looked at the eye-watering billions they spent annually on Boeing and Airbus jets and decided, no more. The birth of COMAC, the Commercial Aircraft Corporation of China, wasn't a business venture, it was a state decree. The mission? The C919. A narrow-body Challenger designed to strike at the heart of the A320 and 737 markets. But how do you build a world-class jet from scratch? You use the oldest trick in the book, the market for technology trap. Beijing issued an ultimatum to the world's elite suppliers. Honeywell, General Electric, Rockwell Collins, Parker Aerospace, the aristocracy of aviation. The message was blunt: you want access to the world's fastest-growing aviation market? You want orders worth trillions over the next 2 decades? Fine. But you won't sell to us from abroad. You will form a joint venture. You will build your factories on our soil. And you will teach our engineers everything you know. In Washington and Berlin, the alarm bells were deafening. Governments warned these companies they were training their own executioners. But the lure of the China dream was a narcotic too powerful to resist. The contracts were signed. The technology was transferred. Today, the C919 is flying commercially. Critics sneer that it's a Frankenstein jet, a Chinese shell stuffed with Western guts. And today, they are right. The engines are Franco-American, the avionics are Western. But they are missing the point. China isn't playing for today. They are playing for 2050. Every flight, every maintenance check, every joint venture meeting is a classroom session. They are learning the dark arts of jet propulsion and flight control systems, one bolt at a time. They are playing a long game of patience that the West, beholden to 6-month profit cycles, fundamentally cannot comprehend. This was a wake-up call for the West. The game had changed. China was already drafting a document that would change the world forever. A roadmap for total technological supremacy. It was called Made in China 2025. In 2015, a document was released in Beijing that sent a shiver through the corridors of power in Washington, London, and Berlin. It wasn't a military manifesto, but it was just as provocative. It was called Made in China 2025. This was the moment the copy machine changed its objective. For 30 years, China had been the world's factory. Now, it wanted to be the world's laboratory. The plan was a surgical strike at 10 core industries: robotics, aerospace, green energy, and, most crucially, semiconductors. It was a declaration that the era of assembling iPhones for others was over. China intended to design the next iPhone, own the patents, and control the entire supply chain. But this transition isn't just about ambition, it's about survival. China is racing against a phenomenon economists call the middle-income trap. If they cannot move from low-end manufacturing to high-tech innovation, their economy will stagnate, just as their population begins to age. They are no longer just catching up. In fields like 5G, commercial drones, and lithium-ion batteries, China has already taken the lead. They didn't just copy the battery, they scaled the chemistry so aggressively that they now control 80% of the world's refined cobalt and lithium. They didn't steal the future, they out-invested the West until the West had no choice but to buy from them. However, the copy machine has finally hit a wall. A wall made of atoms. You can reverse engineer a petrol engine. You can dismantle a high-speed train and measure its parts. But you cannot easily copy a modern semiconductor. These chips are the most complex objects ever created by humanity. Inside a chip the size of a fingernail are billions of transistors, each smaller than a strand of DNA. To build them, you need a machine that prints circuits using molten tin and extreme ultraviolet light. There is only one company on Earth that makes these machines, ASML in the Netherlands. For the first time in 40 years, the West has pulled the plug. By banning the export of these god machines to China, the United States and its allies have created a technological chokehold. This is the Silicon Shield. Without these chips, China's dreams of leading artificial intelligence and advanced weaponry could grind to a halt. In response, Beijing is pouring hundreds of billions into a Great Hill project to build their own chip industry from scratch. It is the ultimate test. Can sheer state will and unlimited capital overcome a century of Western and Japanese precision engineering? But as the battle for chips intensifies, a different kind of rot is forming within. Not in the machines, but in the people. Because the engine of the copy machine isn't just silicon, it's human fuel. And that fuel is running dry. Behind the gleaming towers of Tencent and Alibaba lies a culture known as 996, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. It is a grind that has powered China's rise, but the fuel is running out. Today's youth are waking up to a phenomenon called nejuan, or involution. It describes a society spinning its wheels, where everyone works harder and harder just to stay in the same place. The competition has become so toxic that the China dream is starting to feel like a fever dream. And so, they are beginning to lying flat. This movement, Tangping, is a quiet sabotage of the state's ambitions. By refusing to marry, refusing to buy property, and refusing to participate in the 996 grind, the youth are withdrawing the one thing that the copy machine needs to survive: human ambition. When you combine this social burnout with a shrinking, aging population, a delayed shockwave from the one-child policy, you realize that the world's factory is running out of hands. For the first time, the copy machine is facing a demographic wall it cannot simply engineer its way through. As we move into the late 2020s, the era of Chimerica, that strange, profitable marriage between Chinese manufacturing and Western consumption, is ending. We are witnessing a great decoupling. The world is fracturing into two distinct technological ecosystems. One led by the US, the other by China. Different standards. Different chips. Different internets. The Western CEOs who rushed to Beijing in the 90s are now quietly packing their bags. Apple is moving to India, Samsung is expanding in Vietnam. They have realized that the deal they signed 40 years ago was a Faustian bargain. They traded their long-term technological edge for short-term access to a market that is now their fiercest rival. The student has not only graduated, he has opened a rival school. The copy machine has finished its work. It has shifted the world's wealth and knowledge from west to east in the large. Now, the real contest begins. It is no longer a race to copy, but a race to invent. In this new chapter, the lead is no longer guaranteed to anyone. The question for the 21st century is simple: can the West innovate faster than China can digest and re-innovate? The answer will determine who writes the rules for the next 100 years. Thank you for watching.